Welcome back, everyone. Today we are taking a fascinating journey into the world of British coin collecting as we look at the top 5 most valuable United Kingdom Two Shilling coins. These old British 2 shilling pieces, also known as florins, may look like ordinary coins at first glance, but certain dates, varieties, proof issues, and exceptional conditions can make them much more interesting to collectors. Some were made from silver, while later examples changed to copper nickel, and that difference can have a major impact on collector interest. So before you spend, clean, or sell an old British 2 shilling coin, make sure you check the date, design, condition, and any unusual variety. Today, we will count down 5 examples that deserve special attention. Let's get started. First up, the United Kingdom 1964 2 shillings coin, also known as the florin, in fine condition. At first glance, this coin may look like an ordinary old British coin, but every vintage coin has a story behind it. The 1964 florin was produced during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, and today it attracts collectors who enjoy assembling complete British pre-decimal coin sets. But the big question is this: how rare is the 1964 2 shillings, and what could a fine condition example realistically be worth in today's dollar market? In this video, we will explore its history, design, rarity, collector demand, estimated market value, and the important things you should check before buying or selling one. The 1964 2 shillings was part of Britain's famous florin denomination. A florin was worth 2 shillings, and the denomination had a long history in British coinage. By 1964, Britain was still using the old pounds, shillings, and pence system, several years before decimalisation. The 1964 issue was struck during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II and was made from copper nickel rather than the silver used in many earlier British florins. Around 16,539,000 examples were produced, meaning this particular date is not considered one of the great key rarities of the series. Nevertheless, the coin remains historically interesting because it belongs to the final era of Britain's traditional pre-decimal currency and represents everyday money used by ordinary people during the 1960s. Now let's look at the unique features of the 1964 2 shillings. The obverse carries the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II facing right, surrounded by the traditional Latin legend associated with her early reign. The reverse is especially attractive, showing a Tudor rose at the center, surrounded by symbols representing the nations of the United Kingdom, including the thistle, shamrock, and leek. The reverse also carries the denomination 2 shillings and the date 1964. The coin is approximately 28.5 millimeters in diameter, weighs around 11.3 grams, and has a reeded edge. Its copper-nickel composition makes it different from many older silver florins, so collectors should never assume that every old British 2 shillings coin contains silver. When we talk about rarity, the 1964 florin needs to be viewed realistically. With more than 16 million pieces struck, it is not an extremely scarce coin. In fact, fine condition examples can still be found by collectors. However, rarity is only one part of a coin's value. Condition, eye appeal, originality, striking quality, attractive natural toning, and collector demand can all influence what a particular example brings. Published catalogue estimates show the 1964 issue increasing in value as condition improves, with ordinary circulated examples generally remaining inexpensive. For collectors, the excitement comes from finding an unusually attractive example, a sharply struck coin, or a specimen with exceptional preservation. So what about a 1964 2 shillings in fine condition? Fine condition generally means that the coin has experienced noticeable circulation, with some wear on the higher points of the design, but the major details and lettering remain visible. Based on current published valuation guides, a fine example is generally worth only around the lower dollar range rather than hundreds or thousands of dollars. One catalogue-style source lists a fine example at about 10 pence, while another market guide gives approximately $1.11 for fine, illustrating how dramatically values can vary between retail guides, catalogue systems, and actual marketplace conditions. Therefore, it would be misleading to claim that an ordinary fine condition 1964 British 2 shillings is automatically worth hundreds, thousands, or millions of dollars. For the auction market, the situation is similar. An ordinary circulated 1964 florin normally does not command a spectacular auction price simply because of its date. Auction buyers are more likely to pay attention when a coin has exceptional quality, unusual toning, a desirable error or variety, strong original surfaces, or a very high certified grade. In other words, the real opportunity for value is not simply the year 1964, but the combination of date, condition, originality, and collector interest. Current catalogue information places the general market value of the coin in a modest range, with higher grade examples bringing more than fine examples. If you have one of these coins, there are several important tips to remember. First, do not clean or polish it. Cleaning can leave scratches or unnatural surfaces and may reduce collector appeal. Second, carefully examine the date and the portrait to make sure the coin is actually a 1964 British florin. Third, inspect the reverse for unusual characteristics, possible striking problems, or other features that might make the coin more interesting. Fourth, compare your coin with reliable grading photographs before deciding its condition. If you believe your example is unusually sharp, attractive, or potentially has an error, consider having it examined by an experienced British coin dealer or professional grading service before spending money on certification. The most important lesson is that not every old coin is automatically a fortune. The 1964 United Kingdom Two Shillings is a wonderful historical collectible, but its relatively large mintage means that an ordinary fine-condition example generally has a modest market value. Its greatest appeal comes from its connection to Britain's pre-decimal monetary system, Queen Elizabeth II early reign, and the classic florin design. Current published guides indicate values generally around the low dollar range for circulated examples, with next up the 1962 United Kingdom Two Shillings coin, also known as the florin, in circulated condition. At first glance, this may look like an ordinary old British coin, but it carries an interesting connection to Britain's pre-decimal currency system and the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. The 1962 florin was produced in large numbers, so it is not considered an extremely rare coin. However, condition, eye appeal, varieties, and collector demand can still make a difference when determining what an individual example may be worth. The recorded mintage for the 1962 issue is about 35,147,903 coins, making it a widely available date today. The 1962 Two Shillings coin was struck during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, when Britain was still using its traditional pounds, shillings, and pence system. 1 florin, or 2 shillings, represented 1/10 of a pound in the old currency. This denomination had an especially interesting history because the florin was originally associated with attempts to move Britain toward a decimal-style currency. By the 1960s, however, it was simply an established part of everyday British coinage. The 1962 issue was produced at the Royal Mint in London and was made from copper nickel rather than silver. Sources record its weight at roughly 11.3 to 11.5 grams and its diameter at approximately 28.5 millimeters. One of the most attractive features of this coin is its design. The obverse carries the young portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Mary Gillick, facing right, surrounded by the inscription referring to Elizabeth as Queen. The reverse design, created by Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas, features a Tudor rose surrounded by symbols representing the nations of the United Kingdom, including the thistle, shamrock, and leek. The reverse also carries the denomination 2 shillings and the date 1962. The coin has a reeded edge and is made of copper nickel, giving it the familiar silvery appearance of many British coins from this period. Now comes the important question: is a circulated 1962 Two Shillings coin rare? The short answer is generally no. With more than 35 million pieces struck, the date is relatively common compared with genuinely scarce British coins. One current catalogue describes the issue as relatively common for its period, while another market database lists examples across circulated grades at modest prices. However, common does not mean uninteresting. Collectors who build complete Elizabeth II florin collections still need the 1962 date, and attractive examples with clear details, pleasing original surfaces, and minimal damage can be more desirable than heavily worn pieces. If your coin is circulated, scratches, stains, cleaning, corrosion, dents, and heavy wear can all reduce its market appeal. So, what could a circulated 1962 United Kingdom Two Shillings coin actually be worth in dollars? Current collector price references give relatively modest figures. One database lists approximate circulated values around 79 cents for good, 86 cents for very good, 93 cents for fine, $1.18 for very fine, and $1.91 for extremely fine, while higher grade examples can reach around $3 or slightly more depending on the source and condition. Another reference gives retail estimates ranging from only a few pence in lower grades to several pounds in better condition. Therefore, for an ordinary circulated 1962 florin, a realistic market discussion would generally be around $1 to $2, with particularly attractive higher-grade pieces potentially reaching a few dollars. These are guide values rather than guaranteed auction prices, and an actual sale can be higher or lower depending on the buyer, venue, grading, photographs, and demand at the time. It is important not to confuse this common circulated issue with rare British coins that sell for thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you have a 1962 Two Shillings coin, the first thing you should do is avoid aggressive cleaning. Do not polish it with metal cleaner, abrasive materials, or household chemicals. Cleaning can leave permanent marks and may actually make the coin less desirable to collectors. Instead, Examine the date, portrait, reverse details, edge, and overall surface under good lighting. Look for unusual striking characteristics, possible varieties, attractive natural toning, or an unusually high level of preservation. If the coin appears exceptionally sharp and well preserved, professional identification or grading may be worth considering, although for a normal circulated example the grading cost can easily exceed the coin's market value. Always compare your coin with reliable catalogues and recent sales before assuming that a high online asking price represents its true value. In conclusion, the 1962 United Kingdom Two Shillings, or florin, is a fascinating piece of British history, even though it is not normally a high-value rarity. Its large mintage of more than 35 million coins means that circulated examples are still relatively easy to find. For an ordinary circulated coin, the realistic value is generally modest, often around $1 or $2, with better preserved examples potentially bringing a few dollars depending on market conditions. But remember, the real value of a coin is not always measured by its price. This little florin represents an era when Britain still used shillings and pence, and it survived the enormous transition to decimal currency. So if you have a 1962 2 shillings coin in your collection, take a closer look before putting it away. You may not have a fortune, but you certainly have a fascinating piece of British numismatic history. Next up, the United Kingdom 1955 2 shillings, also known as the florin, in damaged condition. At first glance, a worn, scratched, stained, or damaged old coin may not look very valuable, but every vintage coin has a story to tell. The big question is whether this 1955 2 shillings can actually bring significant money in today's collector market. In this video, we will explore its history, design, rarity, collector demand, realistic auction value in US dollars, and the important things you should check before deciding to sell your coin. The 1955 British 2 shillings was issued during the early reign of Queen Elizabeth II. At that time, Britain still used its traditional pre-decimal monetary system, in which 20 shillings made £1. The 2 shilling denomination was commonly called a florin, and these coins were an important part of everyday British commerce. The 1955 issue was struck in London with a recorded mintage of approximately 25,887,253 pieces. That is a substantial production figure, meaning the normal 1955 florin should not automatically be considered an extremely rare coin simply because it is more than 70 years old. One of the most recognizable features of this coin is the young portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. The portrait was designed by Mary Gillick and shows the Queen facing right, surrounded by the traditional Latin inscription associated with her reign. On the reverse is a beautiful combination of British national symbols, including the Tudor rose, Scottish thistle, Irish shamrock, and Welsh leek. The reverse also identifies the denomination as 2 shillings and carries the 1955 date. The coin measures approximately 28.5 millimeters across, weighs about 11.3 grams, has a reeded edge, and is made from cupronickel rather than precious metal silver. Now let's talk about the condition of the coin featured in today's discussion. When we say damaged condition, we could be talking about heavy scratches, dents, discoloration, corrosion, cleaning marks, rim damage, or significant wear from decades of circulation. Unfortunately, damage normally reduces collector appeal because collectors generally prefer coins with original surfaces and stronger details. A 1955 2 shillings with serious damage is therefore unlikely to command a huge premium simply because of its age. The important distinction is between an ordinary damaged example and a genuinely unusual coin with a recognized minting error, variety, or other special characteristic. Rarity is one of the most misunderstood subjects in coin collecting. A coin can be old without being rare, and a coin can be common in its original mintage but difficult to find in exceptional condition. With more than 25 million 1955 florins produced, the normal circulated example is generally considered a collectible historical coin rather than an ultra-rare treasure. Current reference guides give relatively modest values for ordinary 1955 florins, with estimates varying significantly according to grade and market. One guide lists examples from only a few pence in very low grades to several pounds in higher grades, while another gives approximately £1 for extremely fine and £3 for uncirculated examples. Oh, what could a damaged 1955 2 shillings actually be worth in US dollars? For a heavily worn or damaged ordinary example, a realistic market expectation is generally around the low dollar range, perhaps roughly 25 cents to $2 depending on the exact condition, buyer interest, and exchange rate. A cleaner circulated example can potentially sell for somewhat more, while attractive higher-grade pieces may reach several dollars. These are guide-level estimates rather than guaranteed auction results, and an individual sale can be higher or lower. The key point is that a damaged ordinary 1955 florin should not normally be advertised as a coin worth hundreds or thousands of dollars without evidence of a genuine rarity or error. However, there is still a reason to examine your coin carefully before selling it. Look closely at the date, lettering, portrait, reverse design, edge, and overall strike. Check whether there is an unusual doubling, an obvious striking error, an unusual metal appearance, or some other feature that separates the coin from a normal example. Be careful with online listings claiming enormous prices. Asking prices are not the same as completed auction sales, and a damaged common coin can sometimes be listed online for an unrealistic amount that it never actually sells for. If you own one of these coins, another important tip is to avoid aggressive cleaning. Do not polish the surface, scrape away dark areas, or use household chemicals to make the coin look brighter. Cleaning can create permanent hairlines and unnatural surfaces, potentially making the coin less desirable to collectors. Instead, keep the coin in a safe, dry, non-damaging holder and preserve it in its current state. If you believe your example has an unusual error or exceptional quality, compare it with reliable reference photographs or have it examined by an experienced numismatist before spending money on professional grading. The 1955 United Kingdom Two Shillings is a fascinating reminder of Britain's pre-decimal monetary history and the early years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. Although its large mintage means an ordinary damaged example is not normally an extremely rare coin, it remains an enjoyable collectible with historical significance. Its value depends heavily on condition, originality, demand, and whether the coin contains something genuinely unusual. For a damaged ordinary specimen, think in terms of a modest collector value rather than a life-changing fortune, while better preserved or genuinely unusual examples can attract stronger interest. And that brings us to the end of today's coin journey. If you have a 1955 British 2 shillings sitting in an old collection, coin jar, drawer, or family inheritance, don't throw it away just because it looks worn. Check the date, study the design, examine the surfaces, and look carefully for anything unusual. Even when a coin is not worth a fortune, its history can make it fascinating to own. Next up, the United Kingdom 1958 2 shillings, also known as the florin, in fine condition. At first glance, this may look like an ordinary old British coin, but its age, historical connection, attractive design, and relatively low mintage make it an interesting addition to a collection. The important thing to understand, however, is that a 1958 florin is not generally considered a rare or high-value coin in circulated fine condition. Current collector guides place ordinary examples at modest prices, so claims of enormous values should be treated very carefully. The 1958 2 shillings was produced during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, who had become Queen in 1952. This coin belongs to the final era of Britain's pre-decimal currency system, when 20 shillings made £1 and a florin was worth 2 shillings. The 1958 issue was struck at the Royal Mint in London, with a reported mintage of approximately 9,564,580 pieces. That is considerably lower than several other Elizabeth II florin dates, which is one reason collectors may find the 1958 date particularly interesting. The coin was made from cupronickel rather than silver, so unlike earlier British florins, its value is not supported by a significant precious metal content. The 1958 florin has a diameter of about 28.5 mm and weighs roughly 11.3 to 11.5 grams, depending on the reference used. The obverse features the young Queen Elizabeth II facing right, with the inscription identifying her as Queen by the grace of God. The portrait was designed by Mary Gillick, whose Elizabeth II portrait appeared on Britain's early coins. On the reverse, you can see a beautifully symbolic combination of national emblems, including the Tudor rose associated with England, thistles representing Scotland, shamrock for Ireland, and the leek representing Wales. Around these elements are the denomination and date. These details make the coin historically attractive even when the market value is relatively modest. Now let's talk about rarity, because this is where collectors need to separate historical interest from true scarcity. With more than 9.5 million examples struck, the 1958 florin is not an extremely rare coin. Numismatic references describe the issue as relatively common for its period, although the lower mintage compared with some neighboring dates gives it additional interest. A fine condition example will normally show noticeable circulation, with some softening of the Queen's portrait and wear across the reverse design. Collectors may still want one for a complete date set of Elizabeth II florins, but ordinary fine examples generally do not attract extraordinary prices. The real premium tends to appear when an example has exceptionally sharp detail, attractive original surfaces, unusual toning, a recognized variety, or an unusually high certified grade. So, what could a 1958 United Kingdom 2 shillings actually be worth in today's market? Price guides vary according to grade and market conditions. One current reference lists a fine example around 60 pence, while another guide gives higher retail figures for better preserved examples and lists approximately £4 for EF and £45 for uncirculated. Another current price guide gives around £5.60 for MS60 and £20.20 for MS62, illustrating how dramatically the value can change when a coin reaches certified mint state quality. Converted approximately into US dollars, an ordinary fine example is generally only worth around $1 or less to a few dollars, while exceptionally preserved examples can command substantially more. These are guide values rather than guaranteed auction results, and actual prices depend on buyer demand, certification, appeal, and the venue where the coin is sold. If you own a 1958 Two Shillings, the first thing you should do is avoid cleaning it aggressively. Scrubbing, polishing, or using chemicals can leave permanent marks and may actually reduce collector interest. Instead, examine the coin carefully under good lighting. Look at the date, Queen Elizabeth II portrait, the reverse design, edge, and overall surface. Pay special attention to unusual errors or varieties, because an ordinary example and an unusual example can have very different collector appeal. If your coin appears exceptionally sharp and nearly uncirculated, professional grading may be worth considering, but grading fees should be compared with the coin's realistic potential value before spending money. Most importantly, don't confuse an asking price on an online listing with an actual auction result. Sold prices provide a much better indication of what buyers are genuinely willing to pay. In conclusion, the 1958 United Kingdom Two Shillings florin in fine condition is an enjoyable historical coin, but it should not normally be described as a coin worth thousands or millions of dollars. Its approximately 9.56 million mintage makes it an interesting date, while its Elizabeth II portrait, classic British symbolism, and place in the final years of the pre-decimal currency system give it genuine collecting appeal. For an ordinary fine condition example, think in terms of a modest dollar value, generally around the low dollar range, rather than a spectacular fortune. The real excitement comes when you discover an unusually high-grade example, a genuine minting error, or a rare variety. So if you have one of these 1958 florins sitting in an old collection, don't throw it away. Take a closer look, learn its history, compare it with reliable sold prices, and enjoy the fascinating story that this little piece of British history carries with it.